Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today I'll be doing a review of the film Reminiscence, which is a brand new release starring the likes of Hugh Jackman. And before going any further into the review, make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel with the bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live onto the channel. Boom! Got through that mostly unscarred. So this new film comes to us from Lisa Joy, who has been heavily involved in properties like Westworld, for instance. She not only directed and wrote, but also produced this film. She also had the help of producer Jonathan Nolan. So of course there is a connection there in some capacity with the Nolan universe as such. And this is a movie that honestly is incredibly a mixed bag, because there are some aspects of this film that I thoroughly enjoy. I think the general concept and the general world that is built and established is actually a pretty cool one. It's always fun to have these almost post-apocalyptic type worlds, where this one is, instead of it being your standard, like everything's a desert, everything is destroyed, it's instead one where society is still functioning but barely holding on, and there is just these different elements of, you know, where are things going to go? How much longer can this society actually be held up as such? But clearly, there have been major events that have occurred that have caused destruction of various properties, etc. And so one of the big things that is kind of stressed throughout the movie is that all of the coastal cities are essentially flooding, and that there's this voiceover you hear from Hugh Jackman throughout the movie, which, again, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with, because even though Hugh Jackman has, you know, a nice voice, and he is Wolverine after all, it is one of those things also where you're kind of listening to it and thinking to yourself, this kind of reminds me a little bit about the theatrical cut put out by Blade Runner, or of Blade Runner, where you had that voiceover going on explaining every little thing. The difference, I think, here is that in this voiceover that's given in this film, I think that the information that you're given is necessary, and I think is something where it does give you some backdrop. So it's not like it was added in, tacked on the last minute like it was with the original Blade Runner film to try and make it less confusing. It's rather, this is just a part of the story. It's also very much, almost in a certain capacity, a very much a detective type film. So even though Hugh Jackman does not play a detective character, he actually plays this character who actually has an interesting job in this future. You live in a future where everything is really bad, so it's kind of almost in certain ways even similar to Ready Player One scenarios, where in order for people to be able to get through the difficult times that they're living in, what they decide to do is they decide to basically get lost in their memories. And so the way that happens is through Reminiscence. And so Hugh Jackman runs this little shop, you could say, where people are able to go into this little isolation tank and basically live through the memories from their past. And so it's a way of them traveling to the past without actually traveling to the past, but still able to living out those memories as such. And I do think that the way that they built that up was pretty interesting, because they do establish that sometimes people can get a little too obsessed and can actually just get lost and lost in the world that they have established for themselves. There's also this concept of getting burnt, where essentially you go crazy because your brain just cannot get out of the past. So I really liked that dynamic being added in. However, that then just brings up a lot of questions as far as how similar that is to a film like Inception, for instance, because there are similar ideas and concepts that are established in that film as well. And so even the Reminiscence, I think, does have some original ideas in it, and I've got to applaud it just for that alone. To say that it's a completely original film that's not reliant on other or derivative of any other properties would just also not really be true. And so I think pointing out those qualities as far as the storytelling is concerned is very important to do as such. And so it's an original film, but it's also not so much an original film because it's based off of other material. As far as the actual acting in the film is concerned, I thought it was great. Hugh Jackman, once again, brings it. He's not just phoning this one in. He does a fantastic job, again, playing kind of this detective-like character, trying to find out what happened to the woman that came into his life that he loved, that actually almost sent him off the edge of falling into the level of obsession and potentially getting burnt as well. And so I really liked that dynamic of him playing that character. The woman who is involved is Rebecca Ferguson, who, again, I think is always just an incredibly talented actress and always brings it in the roles that she does. It's actually kind of cool to see both of them, Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson, back, because the last film that they were in together, where there was, again, some type of romantic involvement, at least in a minor capacity, was in The Greatest Showman. And so it's kind of fun to see them play up that role again. And Rebecca Ferguson's always been incredibly talented in the films that she has done. She was one of the cool parts that I enjoyed about the Shining sequel, for instance, Oh my goodness, I don't know why. Dr. Sleep, because of the character that she was able to portray there. Thandie Newton, who, again, Westworld connection there. Lisa Joy being a producer and writer and connecting to Westworld, brought a lot of Westworld talent. There's a few times you're like, oh, this person was in Westworld. Oh, this person was in Westworld. And so that's going on throughout the movie. But Thandie Newton, I think, is definitely one of the more talented of the actors from that show. And she does a great job here. I do find it interesting, though, that with Thandie Newton and Hugh Jackman, you're dealing with two actors who are, from different countries, and that they're, putting on these American accents. So I just always find that interesting whenever you have that capacity, go on and everything. So when I saw the cast, I'm like, oh, maybe they'll actually be able to play up their accents and not have to hide them. But nope, Thandie Newton also had to put on an American accent as well. So I thought that was a pretty interesting turn in this film. And really, again, those are like the three top actors in this film. And there's other, really talented supporting actors in the movie that do a great job. Cliff Curtis is in the movie. He does a pretty good job. You also have Daniel Wu, who plays one of the villains in the film. And again, I thought that it was pretty well done also. There is a couple other people that you'll be able to recognize from the film also. And so I think for the acting, it is definitely one of the strongest aspects of this movie. For the cinematography, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it was solid. It was kind of by the numbers, like nothing too special about it. So it's not one of my favorite shot films of all time. There wasn't a whole lot of innovation when it comes to it. Essentially, you had a person who was established in the industry, someone who knew what they were doing, someone who was competent behind the camera. And hey, you know what? I'm going to give kudos to that, because there have been several films I've seen this year where they've either had unexperienced or inexperienced people behind the camera, or they've just tried to do too many things that ended up kind of getting lost in the weeds a bit. And so I think that the cinematography on this worked well together. And I think that especially ties in with the visual effects, because the visual effects really, I think, do well. You can tell that a lot of these sequences either took place on some type of set or potentially even used a lot of CGI and green screen elements. And it was actually one of the more, I guess you could say, more difficult films to be able to really see what was real and what wasn't real. There wasn't really any moment where I thought, oh, that was bad CGI. And for me, to not be able to have those moments is always a very good thing. That's not to say that the film doesn't look artificial, because it does. It still definitely has that digital artificial feel to it that so many modern day films have. But I will say it is definitely on the better end of things, especially when it's showing the wide cityscapes, which are clearly, not real. I think that they all look pretty good. It kind of reminds me a little bit about how the world of Inception was able to be built, with those similar broad scenes, broad shots where you're clearly seeing something that is not real, but it just works really well and looks really, really cool. And so I think that the cinematography and the visual effects really do tie in and work together as well. As far as things that I was not really a big fan of in this movie, because again, it has all of these different elements going for it, is again the story. I think the story is derivative of other films. I think that it's definitely borrowing from other films. I think also this film is a little bit long in the tooth, where it can at times get pretty boring and pretty self-indulgent. There's a couple of sequences, especially where Hugh Jackman's character is having to fight because he's being put into this tank of eels, and they utilize the slow motion effect a little bit too much in that sequence. And so, again, I think that there are just moments in the film that just definitely dragged on a little bit longer than what they should have. I would say, though, probably one of my biggest issues with the movie is that there are some things in the film, in the world that they establish, which is really cool. Again, it's great in concept. It's fascinating in concept. But then when it's playing out, you're like, wait a minute, but this doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. So one of the big scenes that's been talked about by a few others at this point is there's this one scene where Hugh Jackman's character is underwater. And so I give them kudos for clearly doing some underwater shots with him, because I hate when they do fake underwater shots in movies. But hey, he was down there such a long time where I'm like, okay, unless this guy is a trained swimmer, I don't know how in the world he could have stayed down in the water that long. But for me, and this is more of a personal note, one of the biggest issues that I have with the story is that one of the concepts of the film is that all coastal cities are flooding. And so you're dealing with major cities that have some pretty massive flooding going on here. And then one part and one major location in the movie is the city of New Orleans. And somehow the city of New Orleans just has a little water. And if you know anything about the city of New Orleans, you know that that city is a bowl. If there was any coastal flooding, if there was any massive event that led to literally the world, being consumed by the oceans and the coastal cities being the ones that were most impacted, and based on the timeline of this film, you can see that it is very much already, pretty established. New Orleans will be one of the first cities to go. It is below sea level and it is a bowl. and even a hurricane can create enough water to break levees and then lead to the destruction, like, for instance, that happened during Hurricane Katrina. So I don't buy for a second that they would have been able to have New Orleans as a city that they could have used in this movie for that very reason. It didn't make any sense. They didn't explain that away. So I remember, again, someone having lived in New Orleans, I looked at it, I'm like, no, this is I call BS on this. There's no way that New Orleans would be one of the cities that would survive. Not just because of it being under, not just because it is below sea level, not just because it's a bowl that could fill up very easily, but also, are you trying to tell me that New Orleans somehow was able to finally get its act together and creates solid enough walls around it to keep it afloat and to keep it from flooding? I don't buy that for a second, having lived there and knowing everything about it. So obviously that's something where most people probably wouldn't notice that because they know very little about either New Orleans as a structure or as a political entity. And so that was just something that bothered me because I'm like, oh, come on, that would not happen. That just is illogical at this point in time, just based on the reality of the situation. But in the end, I will say that Reminiscence does have some joy to be had. I think that this is a film that you're either going to really like the concept and you're going to have fun with it, you're going to enjoy the mystery, you're going to enjoy the journey that Hugh Jackman's character goes on, and I think that the performances definitely help with that. But then I also think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to look at this and say, okay, these are all derivative. This is stuff that I've seen before. It's a little bit bland and boring. This is not a movie that I would ever really think to buy on Blu-ray, for instance. It's not something that I feel like I have to have in my collection. But it's one of those films where I don't, I'm not angry that I've watched it. I don't feel like I've wasted any time watching it either. So again, it's kind of this mixed bag for me overall. And so if I had to give this film a grade, I'd probably end up giving it probably around a C+. I think that it doesn't quite get into the B range for me because it does lack that sense of rewatchability. So this is one of those films where I think objectively there are a lot of flaws that can be really pointed out. And if you really wanted to do a deep dive into the logic of the film, you could probably break some things apart. But I think subjectively, I was able to have enough fun with this movie, but not enough fun for me to suggest it as a film you have to go watch or as a film that is worth rewatching multiple times over. But I would say if you like Hugh Jackman, if you like neo-noir sci-fi thrillers, if you are at all liking of, I would say, first season of Westworld, where it's, again, something that is a little bit more competent than the later seasons of Westworld, then I think that you might find some enjoyment in this film. But really, the two things we're talking about are the acting and then the general concept and the general world that is built up here, because I thought that was actually pretty darn interesting. So anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, there is music here by Ramin Djawadi, who has done the themes for Game of Thrones and Westworld, and again, always does a really good job. I don't remember much about the score in this film, so it was definitely one of the more subtle scores that he has done, which is something I don't think he's that much known for, because you think about some of those themes, you're like, oh, I know that theme very well because of just how powerful and strong it is. But let me know your thoughts if you've seen this film. It is available on HBO Max and in theaters. But let me know in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button. It really does mean a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my August Locals, Patreon, and Subscribe Star members. Starting off with my Locals crew: Cat's App, The Real It, D Sharp, Biffer the Hobbit, Robert Barnes, and Goblin Squatch. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Locals. And now on to my Patreon members: Andrew Hoyle, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Lance, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. Thank you very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And lastly, to my Subscribe Star peeps: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And a shout out to one new member, Hannibal Grimm. And a huge shout out to newest members, Brandon and Joe Horn. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Subscribe Star, and to everyone for supporting me on these platforms. Also, a shout out to all of my YouTube members. You get shouted out at the end of every single live stream. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, please check out my Locals Patreon Subscribe Star. And you can go ahead and find those links in the top link of this description. You can find it's called the Willow link, and it'll have a list to literally all of the social media platforms and all of the different ways that you can support the channel. If you join at the $1 level, you can actually get your name shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream. $5 level gives you that, plus you get access to exclusive giveaways of 4K titles. Right now, I've got tons of 4K steelbooks to give away this month, including for Top Gun. I also have A Quiet Place Part 2. I have Snatch on 4K, the John Wick trilogy on 4K, and also I have a Sicario 4K disc as well, and a bunch of others that are going to be coming in this month too. So if you want to have access to any of those types of exclusive giveaways, join at the Army of Asgard level. At the $10 level, the Keeper of the Bifrost level, you get all of that, plus you get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, including instant reactions when I go to see movies. I do quick little filmings of myself and talk about the films that I have seen and my instant reactions to that. You also get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger once or twice a month, and you get to also ask us any question that you want. We put a Q&A post up, and you get to ask us whatever it is that you want to ask. So again, if that sounds cool to you, Keeper of the Bifrost level. And lastly, there is the Chosen of Valhalla level, where you get all that stuff. Plus, in your first month as a Chosen of Valhalla member, you get a free t-shirt, your choice, ship it anywhere in the world, and also you get to once a month be featured on the OMB Reviews channel, and you get to talk with me. We usually chill out for 3 to 4 hours, and I ask everyone what they've been watching, what they want to talk about, what they want to promote, and it's always a really good time. And so if that sounds interesting to you, please consider joining. That is going to be on Subscribestar and on Patreon only, as Locals is just the Keeper of the Bifrost level. But anyway, thank you all very much for your time, for your support, and for listening to this shout-out video. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.